because of things that have happened over the last couple months. I just feel like there's a lot of information that I've given out to date that 2020 hindsight I wouldn't have given out, because I feel like now, no matter what I do, it's going to become public anyway. Whereas if I hadn't given it out, it wouldn't have, because you wouldn't have it, the information to give out.
He didn't stalk the same city twice. He didn't choose victims based on age, race, or gender. He didn't follow a schedule. There was no pattern. For decades, law enforcement had learned how to hunt serial killers by tracking repetition. Where they strike, when they strike, who they choose. Patterns are how killers are found. Israel Keyes understood that. So he erased them. He buried weapons years before he needed them. He traveled thousands of miles just to commit a single crime. He selected strangers he had never seen before. People with no connection to him, no connection to each other, and no reason to ever be linked. And when it was over, he went home. Back to work, back to family, back to normal life. For years, he existed right in front of everyone. Unnoticed, unremarkable, invisible. This is not the story of a man who lost control. This is the story of a man who never did. Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978. His childhood was defined by isolation. His family followed a strict, extremist religious ideology. They lived in rural areas, far from towns, far from schools, far from other children. Social interaction was limited. Outside influence was discouraged. Discipline was absolute. From a young age, Keyes learned obedience. But more importantly, he learned secrecy. Emotions were not discussed. Questions were not encouraged. Disobedience was punished. This kind of environment does not create violence on its own. But it does teach one thing very well: how to hide. As a child, Israel was quiet, observant, detached. Teachers and acquaintances later recalled nothing remarkable about him, and that was the point. Behind that quiet exterior, something darker was forming. Keyes would later admit that his violent fantasies began early, not as fleeting thoughts, but as recurring, deliberate imaginings. He killed animals, not out of curiosity, but out of control. The act itself wasn't impulsive, it was rehearsed. For Israel Keyes, violence was not emotional. It was methodical. He didn't lash out. He didn't act in anger. He didn't lose control. He gained it. As a teenager, he realized something about himself: that planning violence felt better than committing it. Anticipation mattered more than action. This insight would shape everything that followed. Unlike many killers, Keyes did not crave attention. He did not want recognition. He did not want to be known. He wanted mastery, and mastery required patience. In adulthood, Israel Keyes made a critical decision. He would build a life that looked completely normal. He joined the U.S. Army. He followed orders. He deployed overseas. To superiors, he was disciplined and reliable. To peers, forgettable. After leaving the military, he moved to Alaska. There, he established himself as a contractor, started a business, bought a home. He became a father. Neighbors described him as quiet but polite, helpful when asked, never intrusive, no criminal record, no history of violence, no warning signs. He blended in perfectly. But normal life was not a distraction. It was camouflage. Israel Keyes did not kill impulsively. He invested. Across the United States, he buried what he called kill kits, 5-gallon buckets hidden in forests, parks, and remote land. Inside them were firearms, ammunition, restraints, tools, and cash. Some were buried years before he ever returned to retrieve them. This allowed him to fly anywhere without suspicion. No weapons in his luggage, no evidence in his vehicle. Everything was already waiting. Investigators later confirmed multiple caches, but most have never been found. Keyes claimed there were many more, and he was likely telling the truth, because this system worked. For years, Keyes did not stalk victims. He selected them randomly. Different states, different times of year, different circumstances. Sometimes he targeted couples, sometimes individuals. He avoided killing near his home. Alaska was where he lived, not where he hunted. By spreading his crimes across the country, he ensured they would never be connected. Each crime looked isolated, unrelated, untraceable. This wasn't chaos, it was strategy. In April 2009, Deborah Feldman disappeared in Hackensack, New Jersey. She was 48 years old, a lifelong New Jersey resident. A woman whose routines were familiar, predictable, and deeply ordinary. When she failed to show up where she was expected, concern quickly turned into fear. Days later, her remains were discovered in a New Jersey landfill. The circumstances made it clear that this was not an accident. Deborah Feldman had been killed, and whoever was responsible had gone to deliberate lengths to distance her body from the place she disappeared. At the time, investigators had little to work with. There were no clear suspects, no obvious motive, no known enemies. The case went cold. For years, Deborah Feldman's name remained one of many. Another unsolved homicide filed away with more questions than answers. That changed in 2012. After the arrest of Israel Keyes in Alaska, the FBI began reviewing his extensive travel history. What they found was unsettling. Keyes had been in the northeastern United States around the time Deborah Feldman disappeared. His movements, rental records, and timing placed him in the region during the same window investigators believed the crime occurred. Agents also noted behavioral similarities. Keyes was known to target strangers. He favored victims with no direct connection to him. He traveled long distances to commit crimes, often far from his home base. And he routinely sought to separate victims from familiar locations to complicate investigations and delay identification. Deborah Feldman's case fit that pattern. However, unlike other victims, Keyes never formally confessed to her murder. He died before prosecutors could confront him with the full scope of evidence or bring charges related to her death. Because of that, her case occupies a unique and unsettling space in the story, suspected, but not legally confirmed. The FBI has publicly stated that Deborah Feldman is believed to be a likely victim of Israel Keyes, based on circumstantial evidence and behavioral analysis. But without a confession or trial, the case remains officially unresolved. That uncertainty is important. Deborah Feldman represents the part of this story that will never be fully closed. The victims whose names may never appear in court documents. The crimes that left just enough evidence to suggest a killer's presence, but not enough to prove it beyond doubt. Her case also challenges the idea that Israel Keyes suddenly appeared in 2011 or 2012. If investigators are correct, then Deborah Feldman's murder shows that Keyes was active years earlier, testing methods, refining distance.
Because once I was actually in the house, I was probably in the bedroom with them.
5 or 6 seconds from the time the glass broke. So
Where did you break the glass at?
the door, the kitchen door between the garage and the kitchen.
Were they still asleep when you got to there, or do you think they heard that?
They heard it, but they were just barely. I mean, they
Or
were
just wondering what it was?
waking up.
So what happened after you entered the house? I know you said you went right back to the bedroom, took 5, 6 seconds. What happened then?
No, I don't know, told them right away what was going on.
Were they cooperative at first, at least, both of them?
Yeah.
In the summer of 2011, long before the abduction of Samantha Koenig, Israel Keys was already moving across the country, quietly selecting targets that appeared random but were anything but. Bill and Lorraine Currier lived in Essex, Vermont. They were a middle-aged couple with no known enemies, no criminal ties, and no reason to believe they were in danger. To investigators, that normalcy later became one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. There was nothing that set them apart, nothing that explained why they were chosen. According to law enforcement, Keys had traveled to Vermont, specifically looking for a house that offered isolation, limited visibility, and minimal risk of interruption. Sometime late at night in June 2011, investigators believe he entered the Currier's home. They were inside. What followed, authorities say, happened quickly. The couple was confronted in their own home, overpowered and restrained. There were no signs of a prolonged struggle that neighbors could hear, no emergency call, no immediate alarm. The control was deliberate. Investigators later stated that Keys did not intend for the crime to end inside the house. The home was only the beginning. Bill and Lorraine were removed from the place where most people feel safest and taken to a second location. That second location, according to federal prosecutors, was an abandoned farmhouse in a rural area. A place with no witnesses, no traffic, no connection to the victims themselves. It was there, authorities believe, that both Bill and Lorraine Currier were murdered. The couple never returned home. When they were reported missing, the case immediately troubled investigators. There was no clear motive, no robbery that made sense, no obvious suspect. The house itself offered few answers, and the trail went cold almost as soon as it began. For months, the disappearance of Bill and Lorraine Currier remained unsolved. It wasn't until 2012, after Israel Keys was arrested in Alaska following the abduction and murder of Samantha Koenig, that investigators began re-examining unsolved cases across the country. Travel records, rental cars, bank withdrawals, and cell phone data began to form a picture of a man who committed crimes far from home and then vanished back into everyday life. During interviews with federal agents, Keys eventually admitted responsibility for the Currier murders. He described Vermont as part of a larger pattern, traveling long distances, committing crimes in unfamiliar areas, and separating victims from their homes to reduce evidence and identification. The timeline matters. The murders of Bill and Lorraine Currier occurred in June 2011. The abduction of Samantha Koenig happened 8 months later, in February 2012. In other words, the Curriers came before Samantha. To the FBI, the Vermont case became a critical piece of understanding Israel Keys. It showed that Samantha Koenig was not an escalation from nothing. It was part of a continuing trajectory, a man already experienced in home invasions, already comfortable controlling multiple victims, already willing to transport them to remote locations, What makes the Courier case especially haunting is not only what happened, but what it implies. If a couple could be taken from their home in the middle of the night, with no warning and almost no trace, then the question investigators were left asking was unavoidable. How many times had Israel Keyes done something like this before? And no one ever learned the names. And months later, when he returned to Alaska, the pattern would continue until one crime finally exposed him to the world.
Good evening, everyone. The massive search for missing barista Samantha Koenig is over, but it's not the news family and friends were hoping for. Anchorage police announced today they found a body they believe to be Samantha Koenig's in Matanuska Lake out in the valley. Channel 2's Jason Lamb was there as investigators dove into the frigid waters this evening, and he now joins us live from the Common Grounds coffee stand where Samantha was abducted more than 2 months ago. Jason.
On the evening of February 1st, 2012, Samantha Koenig reported to work for a short shift at a small coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska. It was supposed to be routine. A few hours, then home. Samantha was 18 years old, outgoing, independent. She had recently graduated high school and was saving money, like so many others her age, working late shifts while planning what came next. As the night went on, business slowed. Then, just before closing, a man approached the stand. He ordered coffee. Nothing about the interaction appeared unusual. What Samantha didn't know was that the man standing in front of her was Israel Keyes, and that he'd already planned what would happen next. The abduction. After receiving his drink, the man pulled out a gun. He demanded money. Then he demanded something else. Samantha complied. She handed over cash from the register. But the robbery's never the point. The gun was. Moments later, Samantha was forced out of the coffee stand and into Keyes' vehicle. No witnesses saw it happen. No alarms were triggered. Within minutes, she was gone. The house Keyes drove Samantha to his home on Spur Lane. Once inside, the situation escalated. Samantha was restrained, bound, held against her will. Keyes would later admit that what followed was not impulsive. It was deliberate, planned, and controlled. At some point during the night, Samantha was killed. The exact sequence of events would later be partially reconstructed through evidence and Keyes' own statements. What investigators learned next would shock even seasoned detectives. The body. Rather than immediately disposing of Samantha's remains, Keyes kept her body inside his garage. Then he left town. For nearly 2 weeks, Samantha's disappearance remained a mystery. Her family and friends searched desperately. Flyers went up across Anchorage. Police worked under the assumption that she had been kidnapped, but had no suspect, no vehicle description, and no ransom demand. Until one came. The ransom demand. On February 13th, 2012, Samantha's family received an email. The sender claimed Samantha was alive. The message demanded money. Attached was a photograph. It appeared to show Samantha holding a newspaper dated February 13th, seemingly proof of life. But the photo was a lie. Investigators would later determine that Samantha had already been dead when the image was taken. Keyes had sewn her eyes open, applied makeup, posed her body upright, and staged the photograph inside his garage. The ransom demand was never about money. It was about control. The mistake. Keyes instructed the family to deposit the ransom into a bank account. But he made a critical error. He used Samantha's own debit card. As soon as withdrawals began, law enforcement traced the transactions. ATM cameras captured the suspect. A vehicle was identified. A timeline was established. The man who believed he had planned everything perfectly had overlooked one thing: technology. The arrest, on March 13, 2012, Israel Keys was pulled over by Texas state troopers. Inside his vehicle were items belonging to Samantha Koenig. He was taken into custody. What followed would unravel a much larger story, one that extended far beyond Alaska. But it all began here, with one young woman, one shift at a coffee stand, and a man who had been hiding in plain sight. Keys admitted to some murders, but never all. He refused to provide names, refused to give locations, refused to allow families closure. Investigators believe the true number of victims is far higher. But without bodies, proof was impossible. Keys understood that, and he exploited it.
Information on the suicide of Israel Keys. He's the man police say killed Bill and Lorraine Courier of Essex, as well as 6 others across the United States. The medical examiner has ruled Keys' death as suicide. Authorities say he used a razor blade embedded in a pencil to cut his wrist, then used bedding from his jail cell to strangle himself. This suicide happened overnight between Saturday and Sunday morning. We have also information that blood-soaked paper was found in his jail cell. Again, Israel Keys' death has been ruled a suicide, and we'll have more information tonight on WPTZ.
In December 2012, Israel Keys was found dead in his jail cell. He had taken his own life. There would be no trial, no full confession, no answers. He left behind drawings, cryptic writings, fragments of a mind obsessed with control. Even in death, he denied closure.